Hi there, I'm Rebecca. Every day for years, my parents would shake their heads and say the same thing. You'll never own property in this city. But somehow my brother managed to buy a condo with their help while I rented a basement apartment. I smiled and swallowed their words. Last year I lived beneath them, hearing their footsteps above. This year I bought the penthouse that towers over their apartment building. Yesterday they called asking to visit my, quote, new rental. They didn't expect my answer, not after what they did. Want to know what happens when the quiet daughter finally holds the keys? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood by the rain-streaked window, coffee cooling between my palms, watching city lights flicker on across the skyline. The leather chair sat empty beside me, its sleek lines and polished arms catching the last traces of afternoon sun. Not just any chair, my chair. The one piece of furniture I'd saved for, researched, and finally purchased when I got my first real paycheck. The only thing in my old basement apartment that wasn't secondhand or bargain bin. Boston winters had a way of seeping into your bones, especially in poorly insulated basement apartments, like the one I'd rented for 5 years. The radiator clanked and hissed, struggling against the December chill, while upstairs my parents' apartment stayed perfectly warm. I could hear them sometimes, their voices carrying through the vents. My mother's laugh, my father's heavy footsteps, the occasional mention of my name, usually followed by a sigh. February always brought the same conversation. Family financial planning that felt more like an inquisition. Dinners where investment strategies were served alongside pot roast, and everyone had valuable insights except me. I could still feel the sting of last year's gathering, the weight of those dismissive glances when I mentioned looking at real estate listings. "Rebecca, honey," my mother had said, reaching across the table to pat my hand like I was still 12 instead of 32. "In this market? With your salary? Let's be realistic." My father hadn't even looked up from his plate. Property ownership takes discipline, financial literacy, long-term planning. The words hung between us, the implication clear as crystal, things I apparently lacked. I'd arrived at their apartment that night with a folder full of research, neighborhood comparisons, interest rate calculations, down payment strategies I'd spent months perfecting. The folder stayed closed, tucked beneath my coat. Meanwhile, my brother Marcus sat beside his wife, basking in approving nods as he detailed the renovations on his condo, the one our parents had helped him secure with a generous gift for the down payment. "When you're ready to get serious," my father said, serving Marcus another helping of potatoes, "we'll talk. Until then, that basement unit is a blessing. Most people your age can't even afford to rent in this city." I nodded, smiled, thanked them for their wisdom. The folder of research crinkled under my arm as I left. No one asked about my promotion that week. No one knew about the side business I'd been building for 3 years, the one that had just landed its first major client. They assumed everything about me was temporary. My job, my ambitions, my potential. They called me the dreamer, not as a compliment. My father said it once when I was 26, and mentioned buying a small studio someday. "Always dreaming, Rebecca." He'd sighed and shared a knowing look with my mother. Some people build castles in the sky their whole lives. I walked across my new living room, feet silent against the hardwood floors I'd selected myself. 15 stories up, with floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed Boston into a living painting. I ran my fingers over the kitchen island, Carrara marble, cool beneath my touch. Every corner of this penthouse had been chosen carefully, each decision made with the quiet certainty they never thought I possessed. They didn't know about the design degree I'd finished nights and weekends. Didn't know I'd been helping wealthy clients reimagine their spaces, building a portfolio that eventually caught a developer's attention. Didn't know that 3 years ago I'd started setting aside every extra dollar, living on ramen and store-brand coffee while my savings grew. My phone buzzed on the counter. Another text from my mother. "Dad and I thought we'd stop by tomorrow to see this new rental you're so excited about. Marcus says the building has quite a reputation." Quote. I set the phone down without responding. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years of living directly beneath them in the same building, hearing every footstep, every argument, every dismissive comment about my choices. 5 years of them treating my basement apartment like a temporary landing pad, somewhere to wait until I got serious about life. Now I lived above them, 15 floors above the apartment they'd owned for 20 years. In the penthouse they'd pointed to once during a building holiday party, my father laughing as he said, "Now that's for people who know what they're doing in life." I hadn't told them yet. Let them believe I was renting another modest apartment, perhaps with a roommate to finally be sensible about expenses. Let them think what they always thought, that I was just playing at adulthood while my brother built a real life. The renovation had taken 6 months. 6 months of sneaking contractors in when I knew my parents would be at their vacation home in Vermont. 6 months of holding my breath when the elevator doors opened, hoping not to run into them with paint samples and floor plans in hand. I poured another cup of coffee, this one I'd actually drank while it was hot. The kitchen gleamed around me. Not the cramped galley kitchen from the basement with its peeling laminate and temperamental oven, but an open, airy space with professional appliances and that island I'd dreamed about for years. The kind of kitchen my mother had always wanted but settled for less. Because property in Boston is about location, not luxuries. My father's voice echoed in my head. People like us don't own penthouses, Rebecca. We're practical, sensible, content with what we have. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. People like us. He'd been saying that my whole life. People like us don't take art classes. People like us don't change careers midstream. People like us don't take risks. I'd believed him for so long. Through college, when I switched majors from business to design and he refused to speak to me for a month. Through my 20s, when I turned down the accounting job he'd arranged to pursue interior design. Through every holiday dinner where my choices were dissected and found wanting. The last time he'd said it was after I'd mentioned casually that I was looking at properties. We were standing in their living room, the same beige walls and sensible furniture they'd had since I was a teenager. People like us don't overreach, Rebecca. That's how people end up bankrupt. Homeless. Depending on their parents in their 30s. I didn't argue, I never did. I just smiled, excused myself early, and went back downstairs to my basement apartment. That night, I'd signed the purchase agreement for the penthouse. All cash, no financing needed. The culmination of years of work, sacrifice, and secrets. My design firm hadn't just succeeded, it had thrived. What started as weekend consultations had grown into a boutique agency with celebrity clients and features in design magazines. I'd kept my name out of the press, used a business moniker instead. The last thing I wanted was my father Googling me and suddenly pretending he'd always believed in me. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a housewarming gift to myself, chimed softly. 8 o'clock. Through the windows, I could see lights glowing in apartments across the city. Families gathering for dinner, couples settling in for movie night, singles, like me, building the lives they wanted. Somewhere, 15 floors below, my parents were probably sitting in their living room, my father in his recliner, my mother on the sofa with her crossword puzzle. Maybe they were talking about me, wondering what new impractical decision I'd made. Maybe they were planning tomorrow's visit, preparing gentle criticisms wrapped as concern. I hadn't answered their text yet. 5 years ago, I would have responded immediately, grateful for their attention. 3 years ago, I would have cleaned frantically, hoping to prove I was living acceptably. 1 year ago, I might have canceled, made an excuse to avoid their judgment. Today, I just smiled. Let them come, let them see. My hand traced the edge of the kitchen counter, fingers trailing over the cool stone. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sounds of the city below. I'd chosen this quietness, this solitude. My brother lived in a house filled with noise. 3 kids, 2 dogs, a life exactly as our parents had prescribed. He was happy, and I was genuinely glad for him. But this sky-high sanctuary with its clean lines and breathtaking views, this was mine. Every inch reflected choices they would have cautioned against. Bold colors instead of sensible neutrals. Statement pieces instead of practical furnishings. art that spoke to my soul rather than matched the couch. I walked to the main bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the Charles River. The bed was made with linens that cost more than my entire bedroom set in the basement apartment. On the wall hung my most treasured possession, an original painting by a local artist I discovered years ago before anyone knew her name. My father had scoffed when I spent a month's rent on it. Frivolous, he'd called it. Now her work hung in museums, and that frivolous purchase had quadrupled in value. Not that I'd ever sell it. Some investments weren't about money. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from my brother. Fair warning. Mom and Dad are on a tear about your new place. Dad's convinced you're getting scammed on rent. Might want to prepare yourself. I smiled at the screen. Marcus meant well. He'd always tried to play mediator between me and our parents, even as he benefited from their approval. He didn't know about the penthouse either. No one did. I typed back, "Thanks for the heads up. I think they'll be surprised." If only he knew just how surprised they'd be. The last time we'd all been together was 3 months ago. A dinner at my parents' apartment that followed the usual script. My mother fussing over Marcus's children, my father holding court about the market, and me, smiling politely while they talked around and through me. That night, my father had mentioned the penthouse renovation, complaining about the noise and disruption. "Whoever's moving in there is paying a fortune for the privilege," he'd said, shaking his head. "Probably some tech millionaire or foreign investor who'll barely live in it." I'd just nodded, sipped my wine, and changed the subject. The truth was, I'd already started moving in by then. A few pieces at a time, nothing obvious enough to raise suspicions. The movers had strict instructions to come during business hours, when my parents would be at work. I'd even scheduled the bulk of the delivery for when they were visiting Marcus in Connecticut. I stepped into the walk-in closet, running my hand along the custom shelving. My clothes hung neatly organized by color and season, a far cry from the cramped closet in the basement where everything smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how many dehumidifiers I ran. On the top shelf sat a shoebox, worn around the edges, the only thing I'd kept from my first apartment after college. Inside were the rejection letters from design firms, the dismissive emails from potential clients, the notice that my first business loan application had been denied. I'd kept them all, not out of self-punishment, but as reminders of the path. Every no that had eventually led to this yes. Beneath them lay a single photograph, edges curling with age. Me at 8 years old, proudly standing next to a dollhouse I'd redesigned. I'd painted the rooms, made tiny furniture from cardboard and fabric scraps, even installed working lights using a battery and Christmas bulbs. My mother had taken the picture, but it was my father's voice I remembered from that day. "That's nice, honey, but don't you think it's time for more serious hobbies?" I closed the box and returned it to its shelf. Tomorrow, when my parents arrived, they wouldn't see it. They wouldn't see the years of doubt I'd internalized, the struggle to believe in myself when they didn't. They would only see the result, this beautiful space that defied every limitation they'd placed on me. Back in the living room, I curled up in my chair, the one piece that had traveled with me from basement to penthouse. Outside, snow had started to fall, dusting the city in white. 15 floors below, my parents would be watching the same snow, perhaps from their modest balcony, with the plastic furniture and potted plants my mother tended so carefully. For a moment, a familiar guilt surfaced. Should I have helped them upgrade their apartment? Offered to renovate their dated kitchen? Used my success to make their lives more comfortable? But they had what they wanted. Stability, predictability, the comfort of knowing exactly who they were and where they belonged. People like us had modest apartments in good buildings, sensible investment portfolios, and retirement plans that would see them comfortably to the end of their days. I had wanted more. Not just more money or more space, more possibility, more beauty, more risk, more life than could fit in their carefully defined boxes. My phone buzzed again. My mother this time. "We'll bring lunch tomorrow. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches from that deli you like. What time works for you?" Quote. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to prepare them, to soften the shock. Another part, the part that had sat quietly at too many dinner tables while they dismissed my dreams, wanted to see their faces when they realized. Noon works, I typed back. I'll text you the unit number tomorrow morning. Setting down the phone, I walked to the windows and pressed my palm against the cold glass. Somewhere in the swirling snow were all the versions of myself I'd left behind. The obedient daughter, the hesitant dreamer, the basement dweller, grateful for crumbs of approval. Tomorrow, my parents would meet the woman I'd become while they weren't looking. The woman who didn't just dream of castles in the sky, but built one and moved in. I didn't hate them. That was the complicated truth at the heart of everything. I loved them with the fierce, complicated love of a child who had spent a lifetime trying to be seen. Their limitations weren't malicious. They were protective, born from their own struggles and fears. They wanted security for me because they had known insecurity. They praised my brother's conventional choices because convention had kept them safe. But safety wasn't what I had craved. Recognition was. The simple acknowledgement that my different path wasn't wrong, just different. That dreaming wasn't a character flaw, but a strength. Tomorrow they would have to see me. Really see me. Not as the daughter who couldn't quite get it right, but as a woman who had built something extraordinary on her own terms. I finished my coffee, now gone cold again, and watched the snow fall on the city that had been my battleground and my canvas. 15 floors below, my past waited, unaware that I had risen above it in every sense. Tomorrow would change everything. And for once, I wasn't afraid. I woke up at 5 a.m., the same time I'd risen for years. Old habits from my basement days, when I needed the quiet morning hours to work on designs before my day job started. But today the early hour was a choice, not a necessity. The penthouse was bathed in pre-dawn blue, the city still sleeping beneath me. I made my way to the kitchen, bare feet silent against warm floors, radiant heating, another luxury I'd insisted on during renovation. The coffee machine hummed to life with a touch, grinding beans that cost more than the entire coffee maker I'd owned 5 years ago. With steaming mug in hand, I walked to the east-facing windows where the first hint of sunrise painted the horizon. This morning ritual had sustained me through years of doubt and struggle. No matter how small my previous apartments, I'd always positioned my bed to catch the sunrise. Nothing worth having comes before dawn, my grandmother used to say. The only person in my family who believed my dreams weren't just pipe dreams. Today, those words felt prophetic. By noon, everything would change. I opened my laptop and checked my calendar. 3 client meetings scheduled for next week, a site visit to the governor's mansion for a potential contract, and a speaking engagement at a design conference in New York. Work that excited me, challenged me, and had finally freed me from the financial insecurity my parents had always feared would be my downfall. At 6:30, I began my preparations, not in a frenzy of cleaning like previous parental visits, but a deliberate setting of the stage. I placed fresh flowers, white lilies, my mother's favorite, in the entryway. I arranged photo albums on the coffee table, documentation of the renovation process from gutted shell to finished home. I laid out the property deed and ownership papers on the kitchen island, not hidden away but not obviously displayed either. By 10 a.m., the snow had stopped, leaving the city crystalline and bright. I dressed carefully, not in the professional outfits I wore to client meetings, but in comfortable jeans and a soft sweater. Clothes that said I was at home here, not playing dress-up. At 11:30, my phone buzzed. My mother, "We're running early, is that okay?" Of course they were early. They were always early to my place, as though arriving before the scheduled time might catch me in some state of disarray that would confirm their worst fears. "That's fine," I texted back. "I'll send the unit number now." My fingers hovered over the keypad. This was the moment. The last instant of their ignorance and my anticipation. Once I sent this text, there would be no going back. Penthouse B, I typed, and hit send. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. "Very funny, Rebecca, what's the real unit number?" Quote, I smiled and didn't respond. Let them think it was a mistake. Let them ask at the front desk. Let reality dawn slowly. I moved to the entry hall and waited, listening for the distant sound of the private elevator that serviced only the penthouse level. Minutes ticked by. My phone remained silent. Then the elevator hummed to life. They had figured it out. Or more likely, the doorman had directed them. I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. No more hunching. No more making myself small. The elevator doors slid open silently. My mother stood frozen, one hand clutching a paper bag from the deli, the other gripping my father's arm. Behind her, my father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You have the wrong unit," he said immediately, making no move to step off the elevator. I smiled. "No, this is right. Welcome to my home." My mother's eyes darted around the foyer, taking in the soaring ceilings, the artwork, the obvious luxury. "Rebecca, what is this? Whose place are you watching? House sitting?" Of course. Their first assumption wasn't that I owned it. It was that I was temporarily borrowing someone else's success. "It's mine," I said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. "I bought it 6 months ago." My father finally moved forward, his footsteps hesitant on the marble floor. "That's not possible. The penthouse units in this building sell for—" "I know exactly what they sell for," I interrupted gently. "I paid cash." The paper bag crinkled as my mother's grip tightened. Her eyes swept across the space visible from the entryway. The living room with its panoramic views, the dining area with the table that could seat 12, the gleaming kitchen beyond. "How?" The word escaped her like air from a punctured tire. I led them into the living room, giving them time to absorb the reality around them. My father moved like a man in a dream, touching the back of a custom sofa as if to verify its existence. "My design firm has been quite successful," I said, taking the deli bag from my mother's unresisting hands and placing it on the kitchen counter. "I've had some high-profile clients, made some good investments." "Design firm?" My father's voice cracked slightly. "Your little side business?" I smiled, remembering all the times he'd referred to my passion as my hobby or my little project, always with that diminutive attached, always making it smaller, less significant. "Halcyon Designs," I said. "We did the governor's summer residence last year, and the lobby of the Archer building downtown." Recognition flickered in my mother's eyes. "That was an Architectural Digest. They featured the designer, but the name wasn't." "I use a business name," I explained. "I wanted to succeed or fail on the work itself, not on connections or family names." My father had moved to the windows, looking down at the city spread beneath us. From this vantage point, their apartment building was clearly visible. The modest balcony where my mother grew her herbs, the windows they'd never upgraded to energy-efficient models because the expense wasn't justified. "So all this time," he said without turning around, "you've been what? Secretly running some design empire?" The edge in his voice was familiar, the tone he used when something didn't fit his understanding of the world. I'd heard it when I changed majors, when I turned down the accounting job, when I moved into the basement apartment instead of accepting their offer to subsidize a better place that would come with their oversight and judgment. "Not secretly," I corrected, "just privately. There's a difference." My mother had sunk onto the sofa, her coat still buttoned to her throat. "But why didn't you tell us? All these months you've been living here, right above us, and we had no idea." I moved to the kitchen, unpacking the sandwiches they'd brought. 3 turkey on rye, my father's favorite, not mine. I arranged them on plates I'd had custom made by a ceramicist in Northampton. Smooth stoneware, glazed in deepest blue. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Or would you have worried that I was making a terrible financial mistake, that I was overreaching, that people like us don't own penthouses?" My father flinched at his own words thrown back at him. He turned from the window, his face a complicated map of emotions I couldn't quite navigate. "We only ever wanted what was best for you," he said. "No," I replied gently. "You wanted what was safest for me." There's a difference there, too. I carried the plates to the dining table and gestured for them to join me. My mother moved mechanically, her eyes still darting around as though cataloging everything that contradicted what she thought she knew about her daughter. "So the noise," my father said as he took a seat. "The renovation complaints. That was you?" I nodded, meeting his gaze steadily. "I tried to keep it minimal. Most of the work was done during business hours when you were at the office." "You were being considerate." my mother murmured, almost to herself. Even then. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The sandwiches tasted like memory, like Sunday lunches at their apartment when I was in college, like the meals I'd eaten alone in my basement unit while listening to their footsteps overhead. "How long?" my father finally asked. "How long have you been successful enough to afford all this?" The question revealed so much about what he still didn't understand. Success to him was measured in square footage, in bank balances, in tangible assets. He couldn't conceive of the years I'd felt successful in other ways, in client satisfaction, in creative fulfillment, in building something that was entirely mine. "The firm has been profitable for 4 years," I said, "but it really took off about 2 years ago when we landed the Westfield Hotel chain contract. After that, things accelerated quickly." "And you never thought to mention any of this?" There was hurt in his voice now, mingled with the confusion. I set down my sandwich, suddenly not hungry. "When would I have mentioned it, Dad? Between your lectures about fiscal responsibility and Mom's worried questions about my retirement planning? Between Marcus's stories about his promotions and your proud toasts to his success?" My mother flinched. "We've always supported you." "You've always loved me," I corrected. "That was never in question." "But you never supported my choices. You tolerated them, waited for me to outgrow them, prepared for the failure you were certain would come." "That's not fair," my father began, but I cut him off gently. "Look around you, Dad. Look where we're sitting. In the penthouse you pointed to last Christmas and said, 'That's for people who know what they're doing in life.' Remember that? I was standing right next to you when you said it." He paled slightly, the memory visibly hitting home. "We didn't mean to make you feel less than," my mother said, her voice small. "I know," I replied, "and I meant it. You wanted to protect me from disappointment, from struggle. But in trying to keep me safe, you made me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. Like there was something fundamentally broken in me because I wanted different things than you did, than Marcus did." My father pushed his plate away, sandwich half-eaten. "And so you did all this? Bought this place right over our heads. What? To prove us wrong? To throw your success in our faces?" The accusation stung, but I'd anticipated it. For someone like my father, this revelation could only be interpreted through the lens of his own perspective, as a rebuke, a challenge, a statement. "No," I said quietly. "I bought it because I fell in love with it. Because after years of living underground, I wanted light and space and views that reminded me how far I've come. The fact that it was in this building was initially a concern, not a selling point." "Then why not tell us?" my mother pressed. "Why the secrecy?" I sighed, searching for words that wouldn't wound but would still hold truth. "Because I wanted one thing in my life that wasn't filtered through your expectations or disappointment. One thing that was purely mine, that couldn't be diminished by worried questions or backhanded compliments." Silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken history. Outside, the winter sun reflected off snow-covered rooftops, filling the room with clear, uncompromising light. My father stood abruptly and walked back to the windows. His reflection in the glass showed a man I suddenly realized looked older than I remembered, shoulders slightly stooped under the weight of his own certainties. "You think we didn't believe in you," he said, his back to us. "That we didn't see your potential. You believed I had potential to be sensible, practical, conventional," I replied. "You never once believed I had the potential to be extraordinary." My mother made a small sound, something between protest and recognition. "That's not true, Rebecca. We always knew you were special. Special but impractical. Creative but unrealistic. Talented but not quite enough to make it work." I listed the qualifiers that had shadowed every compliment they'd ever given me. The message was always clear: dreams were fine as long as they stayed dreams. The moment I tried to make them real, they became dangerous fantasies. I stood and gathered our plates, carrying them to the kitchen. Through the open concept design, I could still see my parents. My mother perched uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa, my father a silhouette against the bright windows. "Do you know what the worst part was?" Quote, I asked, rinsing the plates before placing them in the dishwasher. "Not the lack of financial help, not the constant warnings. It was that you never once asked to see my work. Not the actual designs, not the business plan, not even my client list. You had so much confidence in my failure that you never bothered to look at what I was building." My father turned at that, his expression stricken. "We thought we were being respectful, not meddling." I almost laughed. "Dad, you've meddled in every other aspect of my life since I was old enough to make decisions. You meddled in my college major, my job prospects, my living situation. The only thing you didn't take an interest in was the one thing that mattered most to me." My mother had risen and was moving slowly around the living room, taking in the details of the space, the books arranged by color on built-in shelves, the collection of vintage glass I'd started in college, the photographs from my travels to design exhibitions in Milan, Copenhagen, Tokyo. "This is really you," she said softly, touching the spine of a rare design book I'd found in a dusty shop in Barcelona. "All of this, it's like seeing inside your mind." For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt a flicker of hope. Not that they would suddenly understand everything, or that years of misunderstanding would dissolve in an afternoon, but that perhaps they might begin to see me, really see me as I was, not as they feared I might become. "That's exactly what interior design is," I told her. "Creating spaces that reflect who we are, how we live, what matters to us. It's not just aesthetics, it's psychology, functionality, emotional resonance." She nodded slowly, moving to a framed sketch on the wall. My first professional design, the one that had won me my first major client. "I remember when you used to draw houses as a little girl. You never just drew the outside. You always included all the rooms, with tiny furniture and people inside." "I was designing even then," I said. "I just didn't have the language for it yet." My father had joined her, studying the sketch with new eyes. "This is your work?" "The initial concept," I explained. "For the Hendricks Library downtown, they wanted something that honored the historic architecture while creating modern functionality." He leaned closer, examining the detailed notes I'd written in the margins, the careful calculations of space and light. I could see him processing, reevaluating, his analytical mind confronting evidence that contradicted years of assumptions. "This is impressive," he said finally. The compliment was simple, unqualified by any but, or, however. Just pure acknowledgement. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. "I have something to show you," I said, moving to the built-in bookshelves. From behind a row of design encyclopedias, I pulled out a leather portfolio, its edges worn from years of use. This is where it all started. I placed it on the coffee table and opened it carefully. Inside were my earliest professional sketches, business plans written on legal pads, clippings from design magazines with notes scribbled in margins, the paper trail of a dream becoming reality. My mother sat beside me, her fingers hovering over the pages as if afraid to touch them. "You kept all of this?" "Every step," I confirmed. "Even the rejections." "Especially the rejections." I turned to a section where I'd pasted rejection letters from design firms, galleries that had declined to show my work, potential clients who had gone with more established designers. Dozens of them, each one a no, that had paved the way to my eventual yes. My father stood behind us, looking over our shoulders. I felt rather than saw him register the dates on those letters, years when he'd been telling me to give up, to be realistic, to follow a safer path. "You never mentioned any of this," he said quietly. "Would you have heard me if I had?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. "Or would you have seen it as more evidence that I was chasing impossibilities?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I turned more pages, showing them the evolution, my first small commissions, press clippings as my reputation grew, photographs of completed projects. A visual history of the success they'd never bothered to notice. My mother paused at a photo of me at a design award ceremony 2 years earlier. I was receiving a plaque, smiling broadly, surrounded by industry luminaries. "We didn't even know," she whispered. "We should have known." I didn't make it easy, I admitted. I kept a lot of walls up. After years of having my dreams dismissed, I stopped sharing them. It became easier to succeed in silence than to constantly defend my choices. "But you're our daughter," my father said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps, in his mind, it did. The concept that I would deliberately keep a significant part of my life hidden from them seemed to wound him more than the success itself. "I'm your daughter," I agreed. "But I'm also my own person, with my own path. One that doesn't look like yours or Marcus's, but is no less valid." I closed the portfolio gently and returned it to its shelf. The morning had stretched into early afternoon, sunlight shifting across the hardwood floors. In a few hours, darkness would fall, and the city would transform into a constellation of lights. My favorite time in the penthouse. Watching day become night, witness to the transition from one state of being to another, much like what was happening in this room right now. "Would you like a tour?" I asked, breaking the heavy silence. "I designed every inch myself." My mother nodded, rising from the sofa. My father hesitated, then nodded as well. I led them through the space. The guest bedrooms with their individual color stories. The home office where I still worked on preliminary sketches before taking them to the firm. The main bathroom with its soaking tub positioned to catch the sunset. I saved my bedroom for last. The most personal space, the heart of the home. As we entered, my mother gasped softly. The wall facing my bed was entirely glass, offering an unobstructed view of the city and sky. The bed itself was positioned to catch both sunrise and sunset, with automated blinds that could be adjusted for privacy or darkness. "It's beautiful," she said, and for once there was no qualification in her voice, no subtle critique disguised as a question. My father had gone to the window, looking out at the same city he'd lived in for decades, but from a vantage point he'd never experienced. "You can see all the way to the harbor from here," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "That's why I fell in love with it," I told him. "The perspective. Seeing familiar things from a new angle changes everything." He turned to face me, and for the first time that day, really looked at me. Not at the penthouse, not at the evidence of my success, but at me, his daughter. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," he said quietly. We stood in silence for a moment, the three of us suspended in a strange new reality. The afternoon light cast long shadows across my bedroom floor, marking the passage of time in a way that felt significant. This moment of seeing and being seen, truly seen, for perhaps the first time in my adult life. My mother broke the silence first, moving to touch the simple silver frame on my nightstand. Inside was a faded photograph of my grandmother, her mother, standing in front of the small dress shop she'd owned in the 1960s, before marriage and children had redirected her path. "You always reminded me of her," my mother said softly. "That same look in your eyes, like you could see things the rest of us couldn't." I'd never heard this comparison before. My grandmother had been gone for 15 years, but in family lore, she was always described as the practical one, the steady hand. Not as a visionary or dreamer. "What do you mean?" I asked. My mother's fingers lingered on the frame. "She wanted to be a fashion designer, did you know that? Before the shop, before she met your grandfather, she had portfolios full of sketches. Beautiful things." I shook my head. This was new information, a piece of family history that had somehow never made it into the stories. "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Life happened," my mother said with a small shrug. Her parents didn't see the point in sending a girl to design school. She opened the dress shop as a compromise, then met Dad, had children. Her voice trailed off. "And the sketches?" I prompted. "Packed away somewhere, I suppose. She stopped drawing after I was born. Said there wasn't time anymore." The weight of this revelation settled between us. I thought of my grandmother's hands, always busy with practical tasks. Cooking, mending, gardening. hands that had once created designs no one in the family had thought worth mentioning. "Is that why?" I asked, the question forming as I spoke it. "Is that why you and Dad were so against my design dreams? Because you saw what happened to her?" My mother looked startled, as if this connection had never occurred to her. "No, we just wanted security for you. The kind neither of us had growing up." My father had moved away from the window and was examining the custom shelving I'd designed for my collection of art books and travel mementos. His fingers traced the joinery, appreciating the craftsmanship in a way he never would have before today. "We come from practical people," he said, not looking at us. "People who survived because they made safe choices. Smart choices." "There's more than one kind of smart," I replied. "More than one path to security." He nodded slowly, seeming to absorb this idea. "Clearly," he said, gesturing to encompass the penthouse, "my life, all of it." My mother had moved to my closet, the door slightly ajar, revealing the carefully organized interior. "May I?" she asked, hand hovering at the edge of the door. I nodded, curious about what had caught her attention. She pushed the door open fully, revealing not just clothes but the workspace I'd incorporated into the closet design. A small drafting table, pinboards covered with fabric swatches and color studies, shelves of material samples and design references. "You work in your closet?" she asked, confusion evident. I smiled. "Sometimes. When inspiration hits at odd hours. It's convenient to have a workspace that's always ready." She stepped inside, taking in the organized chaos of my creative process. Her eyes landed on a framed certificate partially hidden behind a bolt of silk. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it. I felt a flicker of nerves. "Just an industry award. From last year." She brought it closer, reading the elegant script. "Excellence in Innovative Residential Design. Rebecca Carlisle. International Design Guild." Her voice faltered. "This is significant, isn't it? One of the highest honors in residential design." I confirmed quietly. "The ceremony was in London. I was up against designers from 27 countries." My father had joined us now, looking over my mother's shoulder at the award. "London," he repeated. "You never mentioned a trip to London." "You were in Vermont that month, at the lake house." I sent postcards. "Of London Bridge and Buckingham Palace," my mother remembered. "We thought it was a short vacation." "You never said." "What would I have said?" I asked gently. "By the way, I'm being honored internationally for the career you've spent years telling me was impractical." The words hung between us, not accusatory, but undeniably true. My father took the frame from my mother's hands, studying it as if it might reveal secrets beyond the formal language of the certificate. "How many other moments like this have we missed?" he asked, more to himself than to me. I didn't answer. The question was too large, the answer too painful for all of us. Instead, I led them back to the living room where afternoon had softened toward evening. The city was beginning to glow with early lights, office buildings illuminated as workers finished their day. "Would you like something to drink?" I offered. "Coffee? Wine?" "Wine, I think," my mother said with a small smile. "This day calls for something stronger than coffee." I moved to the kitchen, opening a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified, though not in the way I'd imagined when I'd purchased it. As I poured 3 glasses, I watched my parents settle onto the sofa, looking simultaneously out of place, and yet somehow right in my space. The contradiction mirrored our relationship, the permanent disconnect between who they thought I was and who I'd become. I carried the glasses over, handing them each one before taking a seat in my favorite chair opposite them. The leather creaked softly as I sat, a comfortable, familiar sound in a conversation that had ventured into uncharted territory. "I need to ask," my father said after taking a sip of wine. "Why this building? Of all the places in Boston you could have chosen, why directly above us?" It was the question I'd been expecting since they arrived, the one I'd asked myself many times during the purchase process. "I didn't set out to buy in this building," I answered honestly. "I was looking all over the city. But when this unit came on the market, it checked every box. The light, the views, the bones of the space had such potential. And yes, there was something fitting about it being here. Fitting how? My mother asked. I considered my words carefully. For 5 years, I lived beneath you, literally and figuratively. In your shadow, hearing your movements above me, always aware of your presence and judgment. There's a certain poetry in the reversal, don't you think? My father frowned slightly. So it was about making a point. No, I said firmly. It was about claiming my space, about recognizing that I could belong in this building too. Not just in the basement, but at the very top. That both spaces could exist in the same structure. Just as both versions of me could exist in the same life. The practical daughter you wanted and the visionary I actually am. My mother's eyes filled with unexpected tears. We never meant to make you feel that you had to choose, that you couldn't be both. But I did feel that way, I said quietly. Every time you dismissed my dreams as unrealistic, every time you held up Marcus's conventional choices as the only right path, every time you suggested that my creativity was fine as a hobby, but not as a life. My father looked down at his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid thoughtfully. We were afraid for you, he admitted. The world can be cruel to dreamers. The world can be cruel to everyone, I countered. But that's not a reason to stop dreaming. It's a reason to dream more deliberately, more strategically, to build dreams with solid foundations. Like you did, my mother said, gesturing to encompass the penthouse. Like I did, I agreed. But I had to do it without your belief, which made it infinitely harder. My father winced at that, a flash of pain crossing his face. I never thought, he began, then stopped. The irony is that I always admired your determination. Even when I thought you were headed for disappointment, I respected how you stuck to your path. This was new, a glimpse of approval I'd never seen before. You never said that, I told him. I thought showing it would be enabling a fantasy, he replied, the words clearly difficult for him. I thought the kindest thing was to prepare you for the real world. The real world isn't just spreadsheets and sensible investments, Dad, I said gently. It's also beauty and innovation and risk. Those things aren't fantasies. They're the foundations of progress. He nodded slowly, seeming to turn this idea over in his mind. Your mother's right. You are like your grandmother. She used to say something similar about her designs. Another connection to a woman I'd thought I knew, but apparently hadn't fully understood. Tell me more about her, I prompted. About her designs. My mother's expression softened with memory. They were ahead of their time. Clean lines, unexpected details. She designed a dress once with pockets hidden in the seams. Revolutionary then. Said women needed places to keep their secrets. I smiled, feeling a sudden kinship with this ancestor who'd shared my creative vision but not my freedom to pursue it. I have something to show you, I said, rising from my chair. Something I think she would have appreciated. I walked to the hallway closet and retrieved a large portfolio case I'd kept hidden since moving in. Inside were the preliminary sketches for the penthouse renovation. Every room, every detail, the entire vision from concept to completion. I placed it on the coffee table and opened it carefully. This is how it started, before the contractors, before the permits. Just me and these drawings. My parents leaned forward, looking at the detailed renderings with new eyes. These weren't the casual sketches of an amateur, or the vague dreams of a dilettante. They were professional, comprehensive plans that showed both artistic vision and practical understanding of space, structure, and function. You did all of this? My father asked, his tone suggesting he was seeing yet another dimension of my capabilities. Every line, I confirmed. I worked directly with the architects and contractors to bring it to life exactly as I envisioned it. My mother turned pages slowly, examining the notes in the margins, the careful calculations, the color studies. It's extraordinary, she said softly, the attention to detail. The way you've thought of everything. That's what design is, I told her. Not just making something beautiful, but making it work, form and function in perfect balance. My father had paused on a page showing the structural changes required to create the open concept living space. His engineering background allowed him to understand exactly what he was seeing: the complex support systems, the careful redistribution of load-bearing elements. "This is serious engineering," he said, genuine respect in his voice. "You worked with structural engineers on this?" "I did the initial concepts," I explained, then collaborated with the engineering team to refine them. But the vision remained intact. He looked up at me, something shifting in his expression. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me not as his impractical daughter, but as a fellow professional, someone who understood complexity, who could translate vision into reality. "I've underestimated you?" he said simply. "For years, it seems." The words hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that carried its own weight. "Yes," I agreed, not to wound but to honor the truth of the moment. "You have." My mother reached across the table and laid her hand on mine. Her fingers were cool against my skin, familiar in their shape and movement. Hands that had guided mine as a child taught me to hold scissors, to thread needles, to turn the pages of books carefully. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Not just for today, but for all the days we made you feel less than extraordinary. We were wrong." The simple declaration, "we were wrong," hit me with unexpected force. How long had I waited to hear those words? How many nights had I lain awake in my basement apartment, listening to their footsteps overhead, wishing they could see what I saw in myself? "Thank you for saying that," I managed, my own eyes burning suddenly. My father cleared his throat, always uncomfortable with emotional moments. "The question now is where we go from here," he said, practical as ever, trying to find solid ground in shifting emotional terrain. I smiled slightly. Some things never changed, and perhaps didn't need to. His pragmatism was as much a part of him as my creativity was part of me. Different languages for navigating the world, neither inherently better than the other. "We start over," I suggested. Not erasing the past, but building something new on its foundation. Like a renovation. Keep the good bones, reimagine the rest. He nodded, seeming to appreciate the metaphor. "I'd like that." My mother squeezed my hand once more before releasing it. "Will you tell us about your work now? Not just this space, but your other projects? I want to know everything we've missed." The request was simple but profound. An invitation to share the parts of myself I'd kept hidden, to be fully seen and heard. "I'd like that," I said, echoing my father's words. "Where should I begin?" "At the beginning," my mother said. "With your first real project. The one that made you believe this could actually work." I settled back in my chair, wine glass in hand, and began the story I'd never told them, about a small cafe redesign I'd done on a shoestring budget, about the owner who'd taken a chance on an unknown designer, about the write-up in a local magazine that had led to my second client, and then my third. As I spoke, the city darkened outside my windows, and lights came on across Boston. Below us, thousands of stories were unfolding in apartments and offices, on streets and in restaurants. Above us, stars emerged, distant and patient. And here, in this space I'd created, another kind of light was growing, the illumination that comes from truth, from being seen, from the beginning of understanding. My father asked questions, practical ones about budgets and timelines, about how I'd built my client base, about my business model. But unlike before, these weren't challenges meant to expose flaws in my thinking. They were genuine inquiries, efforts to understand the world I'd built while they weren't looking. My mother wanted to know about the creative process, how I chose colors and materials, how I translated clients' needs into designs, how I balanced tradition and innovation. Her questions revealed a curiosity I hadn't known she possessed, a hidden appreciation for aesthetics that had never found expression in their practical home. As the evening deepened, we ordered dinner, not from the deli they frequented, but from my favorite Thai restaurant a few blocks away. We ate at my dining table, surrounded by the evidence of my success, talking more openly than we had in years. "There's something else you should know," I said as we finished our meal. "Something I haven't told you yet." They looked up expectantly, perhaps bracing for another revelation about my secret life. "I've been offered a teaching position at the Design Institute," I told them. "One class per semester, mentoring the next generation of designers." My mother's face lit up. "You'd be wonderful at that. You've always had a way of explaining things, making them clear." "When do you start?" my father asked. "Next fall," I said. I wanted time to prepare properly. "Teaching deserves the same care as design." He nodded approvingly. "That's a smart approach." "Thorough." I smiled at the familiar praise. Thoroughness had always been the quality he valued most, the one aspect of my personality he had consistently approved of, even when he questioned everything else. "There's more," I continued. "The position comes with an opportunity to create a scholarship for students with vision but limited resources. I've decided to name it after Grandma." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Rebecca," she whispered. She would have been so honored. "The Ellen Carlisle Scholarship for Innovative Design," I said. "For dreamers who need someone to believe in them." My father was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his empty plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "She would be proud of you," he said. "We should have been proud all along." The simple acknowledgement hung in the air between us, not erasing the years of doubt and dismissal, but offering a new beginning, a foundation on which to build. Later, as they prepared to leave, my mother paused in the entryway, looking back at the space I'd created. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier," she reflected, "about living beneath us all those years, and now being above. There's something almost mythic about it." I nodded, understanding what she meant. Like the hero's journey, the descent before the ascent. "Exactly," she said, surprising me with her literary reference. "But you know, in those stories, the hero always comes back changed, brings something valuable from the depths." "What did I bring back?" I asked, curious about her perspective. She considered this, her head tilted slightly. "Resilience," she said finally. "The unshakable knowledge of your own worth. No one can take that from you now, not even us." My father stood beside her, keys in hand, ready to return to their apartment 15 floors below. "Your mother's right," he said. "You built more than a home here. You built yourself." The observation was surprisingly insightful from a man who had spent years seeing only what he expected to see. "That's what good design does," I told them both. "It creates space for becoming." I walked them to the private elevator, standing in the doorway as they stepped inside. Before the doors closed, my father turned back to me. "Rebecca," he said, his voice steady, "we'd like to see more of your work, if you're willing to show us." It wasn't quite an apology, not yet a full reconciliation. But it was an opening, an invitation to bridge the gap between their world and mine. "I'd like that," I said for the third time that evening. "How about dinner next week? I can bring my portfolio." "Our place?" my mother suggested, then hesitated. "Or would you prefer to meet somewhere else?" I smiled, recognizing the deference in her question, the acknowledgement that our relationship had fundamentally shifted. "Your place is fine," I assured her. "I know the way." The elevator doors closed, taking them back to the apartment that had been the center of my universe for so long. I stood for a moment in the quiet hallway, listening to the faint hum of the descending cab, feeling the strange vertigo of this new reality. Then I turned and walked back into my penthouse. My creation, my sanctuary, my proof. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm of light and shadow. Inside, in this space I had carved from vision and determination, something had shifted, opened, begun to heal. I moved to the windows and looked down at the building below, at the modest balcony where my mother grew her herbs, at the windows of the apartment where I'd grown up. Then I looked up at the vast night sky, at stars emerging one by one above the city lights. below and above, past and future, both existing simultaneously, both part of the same structure, the same story. My story. The week after my parents' visit passed in a blur of client meetings and design decisions. I threw myself into work as I always had, but something felt different. A weight had lifted, not completely, but enough to notice its absence. Like removing a coat you've worn so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. Friday evening found me standing in the elevator of my building, descending to my parents' floor. In my hands, a portfolio of my most significant projects, and a bottle of wine I knew my father would appreciate. My heart beat a little faster as the numbers counted down, not with the old anxiety of anticipated judgment, but with a new uncertainty about what this evolving relationship might become. When the doors opened, I half expected to find myself back in my old reality, the dutiful daughter arriving for another evening of subtle dismissals and well-intentioned criticism. Instead, my mother greeted me with genuine warmth, taking the portfolio from my hands as if it were a precious artifact. "We've been looking forward to this all week," she said, ushering me inside. The apartment looked exactly as it had for decades. Practical furniture arranged in the same configuration, the same landscape prints on the walls, the same sensible window treatments filtering the evening light. Yet something had shifted, not in the space itself, but in how I occupied it. I moved through their living room not as a visitor seeking approval, but as an equal bringing gifts of my own choosing. My father emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. "Perfect timing," he said. "Dinner's almost ready." "You cooked?" I asked, surprised. This had always been my mother's domain. He smiled slightly, a hint of pride in his expression. "I've been learning. Found some cooking videos online. Thought it was time to expand my skills." This small revelation, my practical spreadsheet-loving father discovering a creative pursuit, struck me as profound. Perhaps our conversations had sparked something in him, just as they had in me. "I'm impressed," I told him sincerely. He nodded, accepting the compliment without deflection. Another small but significant change. At the dining table, the same one where so many tense family meals had unfolded, my mother had set out her best dishes, a detail that didn't escape my notice. This wasn't an ordinary Friday dinner. This was an occasion. "Before we eat," my father said as we settled into our seats, "there's something we want to show you." He disappeared into their bedroom and returned carrying a large cardboard box, aged and slightly crushed at the corners. With careful movements, he placed it on the coffee table and removed the lid. "After you left last week, your mother and I did some thinking," he explained, "and some looking through old storage." Inside the box, wrapped carefully in yellowed tissue paper, were dozens of sketches, fashion designs on faded paper, rendered in confident pencil strokes. My grandmother's work, preserved for decades in this box I'd never seen. "Mom found these in the back of the hall closet," my father continued. "We had no idea there were so many." I lifted one of the sketches reverently, taking in the elegant lines, the visionary details, the notations in a handwriting that resembled my own. A cocktail dress with architectural elements that would look contemporary even today. A coat with ingenious hidden pockets that anticipated functional fashion by decades. She was incredible. I breathed, feeling a connection across time to this woman whose creative fire had somehow been passed down to me, even without my knowledge. "She was," my mother agreed, a hint of regret in her voice. "And no one ever really saw it. Not the way they should have." I understood the subtext immediately, the parallel she was drawing between her mother's unrecognized talent and my own journey. "You're seeing it now," I said gently. "That matters." My father cleared his throat. "We thought these might be meaningful to you. For the scholarship program, perhaps. Or just for your own inspiration." The gesture moved me deeply, not just the sketches themselves, but what they represented. My parents were giving me not only my grandmother's legacy, but also their blessing, their acknowledgement that the creative path I'd chosen had deeper roots than any of us had realized. "Thank you," I said, carefully returning the sketch to its tissue paper nest. "This means more than I can express." As we moved to the dining table, The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. We talked about my current projects, about the teaching position, about changes in the design world. My father asked intelligent questions about business strategy. My mother wanted to know about color trends and sustainable materials. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I could see them struggling to understand my world, still instants when their practical concerns surfaced. But the difference was in how they expressed these thoughts, as considerations to explore together, not as judgments to be handed down. After dinner, I opened my portfolio and began to share my work with them. Really share it, with all the passion and technical detail I would use when presenting to colleagues. I showed them the boutique hotel in Miami that had won a sustainability award, the historic townhouse renovation featured in Architectural Digest, the corporate headquarters that had transformed a struggling company's culture and productivity. This is the project that changed everything for me, I explained, turning to photographs of a waterfront restaurant in Cambridge. The owner had a limited budget but unlimited vision. He trusted me to do something unconventional. My father studied the before and after images with genuine interest. The transformation is remarkable. You maintained the character but completely reimagined the functionality. That's what good design does, I said. It honors what's valuable from the past while creating space for new possibilities. My mother touched the edge of a photo showing the restaurant's striking entrance. It reminds me of your dollhouse, she said softly. The one you redesigned when you were 8? The way you transformed the ordinary entrance into something magical with just bits of mirror and colored glass. I blinked in surprise. You remember that? Of course, she said. You were so proud of it. Explain to everyone how you'd created a special transition space that prepared visitors for the experience inside. The memory returned to me vividly, arranging tiny mirror fragments to reflect light in different colors, creating a miniature entryway that glowed like a kaleidoscope. I'd forgotten that project until this moment, but now I could see how it connected to my current work, how the seeds of my design philosophy had been present even then. I'd forgotten all about that, I admitted. We hadn't, my father said unexpectedly. We still have it, actually, in storage with your other childhood things. This simple statement, that they had preserved something I'd created, something I'd thought they'd dismissed, shifted something in my understanding of our shared past. I'd like to see it sometime, I said. My father nodded. Next time you're here, we'll bring it out. The evening continued with this gentle exchange of memories and new information, each of us offering pieces of ourselves previously kept hidden. As the night grew late, I found myself reluctant to leave, to break the fragile new connection we were forming. It's getting late, my mother finally said, though she too seemed hesitant to end the evening. You must be tired. I nodded, gathering my portfolio. I should head back up. I have an early client meeting tomorrow. At the door, my father hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on his mind all evening. Would you consider? That is, would it be possible to see your current project sometime? In person, I mean. To understand how you work. The request surprised me. My practical father, wanting to witness the creative process he'd so long regarded with skepticism. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. I'm starting a new residential project next week. You'd be welcome to come. Both of us? My mother asked hopefully. Both of you, I confirmed. As I rode the elevator back up to my penthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Hope, caution, a tentative joy. We weren't healed. Not completely. Years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased in 2 evenings. But we had begun something new, something with potential. In my penthouse, I moved through the quiet rooms, touching surfaces I'd chosen, admiring details I'd created. The space felt different somehow, as if the conversations of the past week had altered its very atmosphere. It was still my sanctuary, my achievement, but it no longer felt like a fortress built against those who had doubted me. It was becoming something else, a platform from which to connect, to teach, to share. I stepped onto my balcony, looking down at the city below. 15 floors down, my parents were probably preparing for bed, perhaps discussing our evening, perhaps seeing their daughter clearly for the first time. The thought brought a smile to my face. Not triumphant, but peaceful. The following Wednesday, I stood in the gutted shell of what would become one of my most ambitious residential projects. A historic brownstone in Beacon Hill being transformed for a young family with modern sensibilities and respect for architectural heritage. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through windows temporarily stripped of their coverings. The space hummed with potential. "Rebecca," I turned to find my parents standing in the doorway, looking slightly out of place among the construction materials and architectural plans spread across makeshift tables. "You came," I said, pleased but surprised. Part of me had expected them to cancel, to retreat to the safety of their familiar perspectives. "Wouldn't miss it," my father said, stepping carefully over a bundle of wiring. "This is quite an undertaking." I gestured them further inside. "Let me show you what we're doing." For the next hour, I guided them through the space, explaining the vision, the challenges, the solutions we'd developed. I showed them original architectural details we were preserving, modern elements we were introducing, the careful balance we were striking between past and future. My father asked thoughtful questions about structural considerations. My mother touched original moldings with reverent fingers, appreciating details I might have expected to escape her notice. "The homeowners must trust you implicitly," she observed as we stood in what would become the kitchen. "To hand over something this valuable, this historic. Trust is essential in design," I agreed. "Clients have to believe not just in your taste, but in your understanding of how they want to live, who they want to become in the space." My father had moved to study the architectural plans spread across a temporary table. "These are remarkably detailed," he said, professional respect evident in his tone. "You've anticipated every contingency." "That's where your influence shows," I told him, joining him at the table. "You taught me to be thorough, to plan for every possibility." "I just applied it to a different field than you expected." He looked up, surprised. "You see my influence in your work?" "Every day," I said honestly. "Your attention to detail, your insistence on excellence, your planning skills, they're fundamental to my success. I just express them differently than you do." Something shifted in his expression. A realization, perhaps, that his legacy lived on in me not despite my different path but through it. That in choosing my own way, I hadn't rejected everything he'd tried to teach me. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted. "Neither did I for a long time." I told him. "I was so focused on our differences that I missed how much of you was in my work all along." My mother had joined us now, listening to this exchange with bright eyes. "And me?" she asked softly. "Do you see anything of me in what you do?" I turned to her, seeing suddenly past the practical housewife to the woman who had arranged flowers with artistic precision, who had coordinated colors and textures in their modest home with instinctive skill. "Your eye for balance," I said. "The way you taught me that a home should feel harmonious, that every element should contribute to the whole. The attention you paid to how spaces made people feel, not just how they functioned." She blinked rapidly, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I never thought of those things as design, just as keeping house." "Design is everywhere," I told her. "In how you set a table, arrange a bookshelf, choose which chair goes where. You were designing all along, just without the formal language for it." The three of us stood there in the dust-filled light of the gutted brownstone, surrounded by the skeleton of what would become a beautiful home, each of us seeing the others with new clarity. "I have a proposal," I said suddenly, the idea forming as I spoke it. "For both of you." They looked at me expectantly. "This project will take about 8 months to complete," I explained. "Would you be interested in following it from start to finish? Not just visiting occasionally, but really understanding the process? Seeing how a design evolves from concept to completion?" My father's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You'd want us that involved?" "I would," I confirmed. "Consider it a design education, and perhaps a way for us to build something new together, even if it's just understanding." My mother reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We'd be honored," she said simply. In the months that followed, a new pattern emerged in our lives. My parents visited the brownstone project regularly, witnessing its transformation with growing appreciation and insight. My father developed an unexpected interest in the technical aspects of design, sometimes offering suggestions that proved genuinely valuable. My mother began to explore her own creative instincts, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. They came to my penthouse for dinner more frequently, no longer uncomfortable in the space that represented my independence. I visited their apartment with new eyes, recognizing the care and intention in their more modest choices. We were learning each other's languages, finding common ground in unexpected places. 6 months after their first visit to my penthouse, I received a call from my father that surprised me. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying an unusual note of excitement, "your mother and I have been thinking. We'd like your professional opinion on something." "Of course," I replied, curious. "What is it?" "Our apartment," he said. "We're thinking it might be time for some changes. Nothing dramatic, but perhaps it's time to reconsider some of our assumptions about how we want to live." The request, so simple on its surface, carried profound meaning. My father, who had resisted change his entire life, was inviting me to help him reimagine his most personal space. My mother, who had arranged the same furniture in the same configuration for 20 years, was open to new possibilities. "I'd be happy to help," I said, careful to keep my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my throat. "Did you have something specific in mind?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "But your mother has been looking at those design magazines you left here. And I've been thinking about light. How different your space feels because of the light." "Light changes everything." I agreed. We could start there. 2 weeks later, I presented them with a modest proposal for their apartment. Not a complete reinvention, but a thoughtful evolution that honored their practical nature while introducing elements of the beauty and intention that defined my own space. New window treatments that would maximize natural light. A reconfigured living area that would create better flow and conversation. A few key pieces of furniture that balanced function with form. They listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, considered the options I presented. Then my father surprised me once again. "We've been saving," he said, "for years. Emergency fund, retirement, the usual practical considerations." I nodded, familiar with their conservative financial approach. "But it occurs to me," he continued, "that there's something impractical about holding on to resources so tightly that you never use them to enhance your daily life, to create beauty in the space where you spend most of your time." My mother smiled at him, a private look passing between them that suggested this conversation had been ongoing. "What your father is trying to say," she interpreted, "is that we'd like to move forward with your proposal. All of it, not just the minimal version you thoughtfully included for budget considerations." I blinked in surprise. "You're sure?" "Some of these changes are significant." My father nodded firmly. "We're sure. It's time for us to create a space that reflects not just who we've been, but who we're becoming." The echo of my own design philosophy in his words wasn't lost on me. He had been listening, really listening, all these months. "I'd be honored," I said simply. The renovation of their apartment became a collaborative project unlike anything I'd anticipated. My father, with his engineer's precision, engaged deeply with the technical aspects. My mother revealed an unexpected eye for color and texture, making bold choices that surprised and delighted me. Together we transformed their space, not into a replica of my penthouse, but into something uniquely theirs. A space that honored their practical nature while embracing beauty, intention, and possibility. The day the work was completed, we stood together in their living room, now filled with afternoon light streaming through new windows, reflecting off thoughtfully chosen surfaces, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. "What do you think?" I asked, watching their faces as they took in the transformation. My mother turned slowly, absorbing every detail. "It feels like us," she said finally, "but a version of us I didn't know existed, one that was waiting to emerge." My father nodded, running his hand along the edge of a new bookshelf designed to showcase not just his practical reference books, but also art pieces they'd begun collecting in recent months. "It's balanced," he said approvingly. "Practical, but not austere. Beautiful, but not impractical. That's what good design does." I told them, echoing words I'd spoken many times during our journey. It reveals who you truly are, who you want to become. Later that evening, as we shared dinner at their new table, one that encouraged conversation rather than formality, my father raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To Rebecca," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion rarely displayed, "who taught us that looking up can change everything." My mother joined the toast, adding softly, "And to new beginnings, at any age." I raised my own glass, meeting their eyes across the table. "To spaces that allow us to become our truest selves, and to the courage to create them." As I rode the elevator back up to my penthouse that night, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. From basement to penthouse, from misunderstanding to connection, from judgment to appreciation. The physical distance between our apartments, 15 floors, remained unchanged, but the emotional distance had been bridged in ways I never thought possible. I stepped into my home, moving through rooms that now held not just my singular vision but echoes of shared understanding. The space remained my sanctuary, my achievement, my proof, but it had become something more. A platform from which connection had grown, a beginning rather than an endpoint. Standing at my windows, I looked down at the city below. Somewhere in that building, 15 floors down, light glowed from newly designed windows. My parents moved through spaces that reflected not just who they had been, but who they were becoming. And I stood above, no longer needing the height to prove my worth, but appreciating the perspective it offered. The ability to see both where I had come from and the infinite possibilities that stretched before all of us. Some might call it revenge, buying the penthouse above parents who never believed I could own property. But I had discovered something far more valuable than vindication. I had found reconciliation, understanding, growth, not just for myself but for all of us. The true power wasn't in rising above those who doubted me, but in bringing them along on the journey upward. In creating spaces, both physical and emotional, where transformation became possible, where we could all, finally, look up and see the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.